Good morning. This is the time and place for the Planning Hearing Officer's hearing of September 12th, 2018. My name is Vilia Zamaitaitis, and I will be the hearing officer for the first case on today's agenda. There are two cases on today's agenda. The first case being a parking reduction permit for 2060 through 2066 Verdugo Boulevard and 3734 Park Place. That item is being moved and it will be heard as the second item on today's agenda, which brings us to the second case, which is a variance for 108 South Brand Boulevard, and this would be case number PVAR 181826. But before we get into this particular case, I'd like to go over the introduction for the Planning Hearing Officer's hearing. First being findings that if evidence presented in the application and at the hearing meets the criteria for either a parking reduction or a variance, the planning hearing officer can either approve, oppose conditions for approval on the question, on the case in question, or if the findings of facts cannot be made, then the case must be denied. Note that notification of this hearing was accomplished by use of public notices, which were mailed to all property owners and occupants within 500 feet. The site was physically posted, and the notice was also placed in the local newspaper. The hearing will proceed as follows. We will read the description of the application request. I will then go over any comments from other departments. The case planner will make a brief overview of the case, give analysis, and make a recommendation. The applicant will then be asked to come forward stating both name and address, and will be asked to present the case within a 15-minute time limit. Others in the audience who wish to speak will then be asked to come forward stating both name and address, and will have a 3-minute time period. The applicant will then be given the opportunity to make a rebuttal in a 5-minute time limit period, and the hearing will be closed and the case taken under submission. After the hearing, the decision will be prepared in writing and will be in the form of a letter sent to the applicant and to all persons who responded to the public notice, either by speaking at the hearing or by submitting written responses. The date of the decision will be the date appearing on the letter. And under the city's appeal provisions, the case may be appealed within a 15 calendar date period of the decision date. And appeal applications are available in permit services in the building and safety section. If you wish to speak, please write your name and address on the speaker forms provided at the table by the front door and submit it to staff. And I would also like to inform everyone that the official proceedings of the public hearing officer are being recorded and are also televised on GTV6. Which brings us to today's agenda. As noted, the first case to be heard today is variance case number PVAR 181826, located at 108 South Brand Boulevard. The applicant is Mitch Chemers, and the project description is this is an application for a standards variance to allow 3 projecting signs for a second floor occupancy, a projecting sign to be 96 square feet in area, and a 24-inch thick projecting sign, a proposed 171 square foot wall sign, and a non-accessory sign for the Ross store to be located in the DSP Maryland Arts and Entertainment District. I'd like to turn the hearing over to the case planner, Mr. Roger Kiesel.
Good morning, Ms. Zamaitaitis. Mitch Chemers is requesting approval of a variance to allow the installation of 5 signs to advertise a new retail tenant going into the Glendale marketplace, which is located at 108 South Brand. The applicant is proposing 3 projecting signs, a wall sign, and a non-accessory sign that require approval of variances. Regarding the projecting signs, the city's sign regulations state that projecting signs are only permitted or only allowed for ground floor occupancies. Further, the area of the projecting sign cannot exceed 12 square feet or a thickness not to exceed 12 inches. Ross will be located in a second floor tenant space and is proposing a projecting sign which is approximately 96 square feet and 24 inches in thickness. The other two projecting signs will be located on either side of the Ross store entrance, but otherwise comply with the city's sign regulations in terms of area and thickness. Regarding the non-accessory sign, the non-accessory sign is proposed on the second floor wall facing the parking garage. Only accessory wall signs are permitted in the code, and this sign is not adjacent to the Ross tenant space, so that's the reason for the variance for this sign. And then finally, regarding the wall sign, Ross is proposing two wall signs. One is facing Brand Boulevard, and the other one is facing the pedestrian paseo within the Glendale Marketplace. Sign regulations state that for wall accessory signs, you are allowed 1 square foot of sign area per lineal foot of building frontage or tenant frontage. The wall sign facing the pedestrian paseo is proposed to be 173 square feet, and the wall adjacent, the Ross facade wall on that pedestrian facade is just under 100 square feet. So the proposed sign is too big, and that is what is requiring a variance. The sign actually that is proposed on Brand Boulevard complies with code in terms of area. So there are 4 findings of fact that need to be made to grant the variances. Staff believes the findings can be made for the projecting and non-accessory signs, however, and recommends approval of these variances. However, the staff does not believe the findings can be made for the wall sign and is recommending disapproval. So the intent of the sign code is really to create a more attractive business climate, enhance and protect the physical appearance of the city, and encourage the most appropriate use of land, among other things. Ross will become a major tenant in the Glendale Marketplace, and as I said before, is located on the second floor of this development. Visibility of this tenant is significantly limited from the public right-of-way. Projecting signs are generally located on retail streets with significant pedestrian traffic and advertise to shoppers who cannot otherwise see the more automobile-oriented signs. This sign is typically associated with Main Street shopping streets like Montrose or Kenneth Village, things like that. The standards for size and thickness of this type of sign reflect that generally pedestrian-oriented nature of that type of sign. While Brand Boulevard does have significant pedestrian traffic, it is not a traditional main street and has a large volume of auto traffic as well. The proposed non-accessory sign will be located on a building wall facing east toward the pedestrian bridge over Artsock Avenue, leading to the parking garage. Many customers of the marketplace use this parking garage. While Ross will become a major tenant in the marketplace, it really has no visibility from the east. The proposed non-accessory sign will be approximately 25 square feet in area and will serve to identify this large second floor tenant retail. Given Ross's location within the marketplace and that the projecting and non-accessory signs comply or are consistent with the intent of the sign regulations, it would be an unnecessary hardship to deny the variances for these signs. However, for the wall sign, strictly applying the sign standards would not result in an unnecessary hardship because the larger sign would further clutter the appearance of the southern facade at its proposed location, and really only has a limited visibility and only for a short duration where it's located. With regard to the projecting and non-accessory signs, there are exceptional circumstances involved that do not generally apply to other tenant spaces, which weren't granting the variances. As I said before, projecting signs are really more focused on the pedestrian street level and commercial strip centers. And the Ross retail tenant space really has limited visibility. The unique nature of Brand Boulevard, which is both prominent pedestrian and automobile street, as well as the limited visibility, are the exceptional circumstances which warrant granting the variances for the non-accessory and the protecting signs. Switching back to the wall sign, there are no exceptional circumstances that don't apply to this property which warrant granting the variance. The south wall forms the northern boundary of the pedestrian paseo. The sign at this location will have limited pedestrian and automobile visibility coming from the south due to existing development, and only for a short period of time. There's a rotunda as part of this development, as well as the remainder of the center that really block the visibility of the sign for all but a few seconds while you're driving. And then the wall sign will really have no visibility coming from the north because it's on the south-facing wall. The third finding, with regard to projecting and non-accessory signs, the granting of the variance will not be detrimental to the public welfare because the proposed signs will not create over-signage issues and are attractively designed. Both the projecting signs and the non-accessory sign include some neon, which adds interest to the sign. They're more than just the standard box signs that you normally see. The non-accessory sign, actually also, neither of those two signs generated any concern from the other city departments. So neither of the signs should be detrimental. With regard to the wall sign, granting of the variance will be detrimental because, as I mentioned before, it really will provide some unnecessary clutter for this facade of the development. If you notice on the elevation, there's a lot going on that facade. There's an escalator, there are some decorative elements on the building, there's the building entrance, there's an awning, and adding a sign that is too big for the area allowed would just provide unnecessary clutter to that entire facade. So, and then finally, regarding the projecting non-accessory signs, the granting of variance will not be contrary to the objectives because the signs will not create a visual hazard or obstruction for the pedestrians or motorists, will increase the visibility and viability of Ross, and are attractively designed. The Ross sign, the projecting sign located on the Brand Boulevard facade will have a what do you call it, height above the sidewalk of approximately 22 feet, so plenty of space to prevent visual hazards from either pedestrians or automobiles. Ross's second floor tenancy limits the visibility of the store, and so the non-accessory sign will help in providing that visibility from people coming from the east who enter the marketplace from the parking garage. And then finally, regarding the increase in size for the requested wall sign, again, it really doesn't, is contrary to the objectives of the ordinance, as it will lead to a cluttered appearance, which is contrary to protecting and enhancing the appearance of the community. So that concludes my presentation, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Kiesel. I believe that there is a wall sign permit for the Ross sign located facing the interior courtyard already.
There is. There are probably the easiest way to explain it is there are two components to the sign. There's the Ross letters above, and then there's the Dress for Less letters below. The Ross part of the sign on its own is below the limits for wall signs, so it's less than 100 square feet. What kicks the sign above the 100 square feet is the Dress for Less. So Ross did get a permit for the Ross letters.
Thank you very much. At this time, I would like to call the applicant, Mr. Mitch Chemers, to come to the podium. State your name and address for the record, please, and you have 15 minutes to go through the project and the required findings.
Thank you. Mitch Chemers, 6154 Lamona Avenue, Van Nuys, California, 91335. So thank you very much. Thank you for the report. The applicant concurs with the vast majority of all of the elements of the report. We do want to make a clarification about one of the signs and some statements about it. But first I'll just go through the various signs and provide just a little bit of context for what was proposed and why it was proposed. So, as mentioned, this tenant space is fairly hidden within the shopping center, and the entrance to it, the primary entrance, is relatively hidden as well. It's up on the second elevation, and it's not something that's readily visible from anyone on the pedestrians or drivers in the street. So the layout of the signs really don't serve a traditional purpose of there's a storefront, there's a sign above it. These signs that you see, the conforming and non-conforming, they help establish that the store is in the building, but they also work design-wise to create a sense of place. So for example, the projection sign, that really serves the building rather than just the store itself. So it was designed very similar to another projecting sign that it was needed in an art and entertainment type environment. So that projecting sign could actually be placed probably anywhere on the building. It wouldn't even necessarily need to be next to the store or attached to the store itself. It helps that it is, but because of its more arts and entertainment type of design, it contributes to what the city's trying to achieve in this area and in this building. And of course, the non-accessory sign on the other side of the building, it serves the same purpose. And back to the projecting sign, we understand city supports it. Just want to explain that although it might seem like a minor thing, the request for the increased depth is pretty important, so that a sign with neon really does need to have more depth for maintenance. Neon is an old technology at this point, but it does have requirements that new technology doesn't lend itself to. So the applicant loves using neon. Especially multicolored neon, but it does have particular needs. And so we appreciate the support on that. So there is also the conforming sign on Brand Boulevard, and that serves yet another purpose of really providing identity to brand in both directions for traffic. And then that's really what brings us to the side facing the courtyard, the walkway. I'd like to make a correction about that sign. There was an error, and we were, and Mr. Kiesel actually contacted me about it, and I need to correct it. This was an error that existed during the life of the submittal and currently in the application wrong. The overall square footage of the sign is proposed, this is the S2 sign facing the courtyard, is proposed 172.8 square feet. When I was going through this project over the last couple of days, yesterday specifically, I discovered that that number was wrong, and I apologize for confusion.
So just to clarify, it would be this particular sign facing?
Correct. And that's a combination of both lines of text.
Okay.
So it's proposed at 172.8. The actual overall size comes out to 123.7, which is quite a bit smaller. So the existing permitted sign, the actual size of it is 85.2, under the allowable 99 square feet. So it's 85.2. So that means that the allowable being 99, the real request, the extra area, what's being requested over allowable is 124.7. It's almost 100. 100.
It should be 24 square feet.
24. So that's the ultimate request of the variance. So rather than 73 square feet, it's 24 square feet. So regardless of what we think of the design, I just want to make sure the numbers are correct on the record, because that was a mistake, and we do apologize for that. So we're at 24% over, rather than what was originally appeared to be a 72 or 73% over. So yes, the permit was obtained for the Ross letters, and the applicant is asking to be able to put the dress for less on there at the sizes proposed. And part of the reason for this is you can see the sign from from northbound Brand Boulevard. Having that sign there, although it's not as good a visibility as other signs, it does help contribute to what they're looking for is a sense of place or a focal point. So you can see it, so it helps with identity. It lets you know that there is an entrance. And then when you're in the shopping center, when you're in that environment, or especially when you get upstairs, there is a focal point. Because it doesn't matter if we have tons of signs, without an actual storefront, without a real focal entry point, it loses something. And this elevation is challenging. There are architectural elements all over the elevation, and it wasn't easy. We spent months actually trying to figure out a design-wise a nice location for that sign, and this is ultimately what was decided on. There's no really center focus point for it, other than to know that when you're there, you're at the entrance. So it serves a dual purpose. There's palm trees not shown in the elevations that you see here that partially obscure the sign from the street. When you're there, when you're driving by, you're there, there's sort of a little bit of a visual separation, so it's visible, but it's not overpowering. So the applicant believes that sort of helps mitigate this, the impression that it might be too much or too cluttered. Unfortunately, you're not seeing good drawings here, photographs that show that elevation. Well, right. And that means what you're seeing there sort of demonstrates that it's partially obscured because the trees are a little more grown out than what you see in that photograph. And it's not having a storefront or not having a strong presence at the storefront itself is a bit of a sacrifice. And that helps explain the purpose of this variance request. And I really do believe that partial obstruction, visibility, helps mitigate the potential clutter or proliferation of signage. And it's worth, creating that sense of place and a focal point for the storefront. So in all, the signs were designed to create a balance on the building, and the identity. And I apologize that Ross isn't here, couldn't make it this morning. They wanted to discuss the importance of the brand identity, and just having the Ross name. They find that in other stores around the country, having the name without the dress for less, it has an impact. So that's the purpose for it as well. The overall layout of signs are designed to more contribute now to the goals of the plan area. Unfortunately, after a lot of work and debate, there wasn't a lot of entertainment design that can be integrated into the Ross letters themselves. That actually was a lot of work to come to that decision. But we're hoping that the non-accessory sign on the other side of the building, the projecting sign on Brand Boulevard helps contribute to what we're trying to achieve there for the area. And let's see if there's, okay. Other than that, I think that'll do it for this part of the presentation.
All right. Thank you. I have a few questions. You mentioned the discrepancy between the application and the actual sign area for the wall sign facing the interior courtyard from 173 to 123. Would you mind elaborating in regards to the calculations and why there was such a discrepancy?
That was ultimately an inexcusable error. We had multiple people, and we didn't calculate it correctly. It wasn't quality controlled when it was finally submitted.
Okay, so I know our sign code allows for boxing in individual channel letters versus actually boxing in the total area of the sign. Was that the reason behind the change in
Well, that was from our end. That it has to explain that some or all of it was completely boxed in.
So it was from the initial submittal, it was completely boxed in the entire sign area.
Right.
So in terms of recalculating it to box in the individual channel letters, that brought down the overall area of the sign to 123.
Right.
Okay. All right. Would you be open to moving the sign? Because you mentioned the palm trees and other factors that block visibility in certain locations. Right now you're proposing it to the side of the entrance, whereas if you take a look at the photograph from the courtyard, there's more visibility if you move the sign to the interior of the courtyard.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I'm very familiar with the options there. Mm-hmm. And so our challenges are our tenant space ends.
Because you're essentially proposing the signage at this location?
Right.
And if you move the signage right above the entrance?
The drawing that you just pointed to is a little deceptive. It shows the grayed out, the hashed area for the tenant space itself, mm-hmm. But to the right of that, the wall continues, and that's another tenant. You pointed directly above the entrance. The sign can't go there because of the canopy and the cables that hold the canopy up. It could squeeze and fit, but it would never fit centered, mm-hmm. And it would be so small to not be useful.
So I think what you're saying is basically, here are the two entrances. Right around here is where the Ross tenant ends, correct?
Yes, thank you.
So this is another tenant.
Right, understood. And I guess moving it over, when you talk about the cables to the awning, so if you were to move this over, you would be
Too small to,
running into the cables, the existing cables.
right, and then
Okay.
too small to be useful.
Okay. My second question deals with the projecting sign. You spoke about the neon tubing and the requirements for such signage. The upper portion of the sign is 18 inches wide. The lower portion is 24 inches wide, whereas our code requires a maximum 12-inch width for projecting signs. Would you mind elaborating why you need the 24 inches at the bottom versus the 18 at the top, though the tubing goes around the exterior shape?
That's where transformers go. You know, the technology has changed, but transformers are still these big, monstrous tar-filled coils of copper. So to keep all the technology in there, it's got to have room to circulate air. And so we know from experience that when there's not enough room for air circulation and access, so when it gets serviced, you've got to pull it apart, reach in there, move things around. Neon goes out sooner. The heat has a negative impact on the sign as a whole. And when they put this sign up, they don't want to be servicing it every month. They want it to work well for the foreseeable future. And this has a huge impact on that.
Was LED tubing considered?
LED tubing isn't, it doesn't look the same. It doesn't work as well. It doesn't have the same impact. People use it, maybe the technology will get there, but what makes the sign cool and gives it the feel that it has is the neon.
All right. I have no other questions for the applicant.
Yeah. If I could just clarify one thing.
Please.
When we mentioned back to S2 facing the courtyard, the trees and its position within the paseo, I'd like to point out that I prefer to use the word partially obscured rather than really blocked, because you can see the sign. It's just not as big and obvious and open as, say, the other signs facing the street. So it's in this sort of Goldilocks area, this situation where it's obscured enough to not have an impact, but it's visible enough to be functional and useful. And that's why the applicant feels as strong as they do about it, and that's why they're requesting the variance.
Okay. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Are there any other individuals in the audience that wish to speak? None noted. At this point in time, I will be taking the matter under submission and be rendering a decision shortly.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. That said, we will go to the next item on today's agenda. However, there will be a slight short break before so, and we will return, and Milka Toledo, the case planner, will make her presentation, and Roger Kiesel will actually be the hearing officer. So, the 5-minute break. Thank you.
Great. The next item on the agenda is a parking reduction case number PPRP 1705462. It's located at 2060 through 2066 Verdugo Boulevard and 3734 Park Place. The applicant is Alan Malikian. The owner is Verdugo King LLC. And the project description, real quickly, is to remodel and expand the existing shopping center by constructing a new 2,000 square foot retail tenant space while not providing the required number of on-site parking and loading spaces. As proposed, the project will result in a 16-space parking shortfall and will not provide the required one loading space for the entire shopping center. The project is located in the C3-1 Height District 1, I should say, and the IND industrial zone. I'm going to turn it over to Milka Toledo, who's a staff member who will make a brief presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Kiesel. As you stated, the project is located at 2060 through 2066 Verdugo Boulevard and 3734 Park Place. This site is zoned both commercial, C3-1, and IND industrial. So the portion where the addition is taking place does fall under the IND zoning area. The applicant, again, is proposing to remodel and expand the existing shopping center. They're proposing to add 2,000 square feet of retail tenant space while not providing the required number of on-site parking and loading spaces. Project will result in a 16-space shortfall and will not provide the required one loading space for the entire site. And as it relates to the loading area, we are applying the Chapter 3032. It is entitled Parking and Loading. It regulates both parking and loading requirements and standards. Further, Chapter 3032 150A1 states that in addition to the minimum number of automobile parking spaces, the minimum number of off-street loading spaces, et cetera, would be applicable. So clearly there is a correlation between parking and loading, and therefore that's why we are using these standards to apply for the loading. So I will continue on. There is an existing previous entitlement, which was approved back in May 18, 2010, a parking reduction permit, PPRP 2010-005. It was approved with conditions to allow the expansion of a full-service restaurant, at that time Fratelli's Pizza, into the adjacent tenant space without providing the required parking. The project resulted in a 7-space parking shortfall at that time and provided a total of 65 on-site parking spaces. So as we continue to process this case and eventually when you make your final determination, consider that parking reduction as part of the project as well because it's applicable here. And back in 1993, there was a standards variance that was granted with conditions to allow the establishment. But again, that's prior to the latest parking reduction that was approved back in 2010. However, today, this is a parking reduction strictly for the addition of 2,000 square feet of retail space that the applicant is proposing. The project, as proposed, and this is outlined in your staff report, there are 63 current parking spaces on the property. Just to highlight, as we noted, the previous parking reduction permit was approved for the site requiring 65 spaces. At that time, again, the project involved the expansion of the full-service restaurant. And currently, there are 63 on-site parking spaces in the shopping center. The reduction from 65 to 63 was a result of field changes that took place to comply with ADA requirements by providing new and or upgrading existing ADA parking spaces. And also the installation of a trash enclosure compromised one parking space at the southeast corner of the site. So today we're working with the on-site conditions, which again is 63. New parking spaces required for the 2,000 square foot expansion is 8. It's a 4 per 1,000 square foot of space requirement, and that is a retail space. So 4,000 square feet per 1,000 square feet of retail space. Total required is 71. Total proposed is 55. Net shortfall is 16 spaces. And that is what is before you today for your review. Just to briefly highlight a little bit about the site in terms of the description of the property and the existing uses. The building is located in a multi-tenant commercial shopping center, again, located on the south side of Verdugo Boulevard. And the site is approximately 43,868 square feet. Total area for all uses on the site is 10,604 square feet. And the existing uses on the site include a fast food restaurant with drive-through, which is the Burger King. There are 4 service-type uses that includes like hair, retail. There's a hair salon, a dry cleaners. I believe there's also a Goodwill there as well. There's also a tenant space occupied by a full-service restaurant. The parking lot is accessed from Verdugo Boulevard, and the surrounding properties include both retail to the north and the west, industrial offices and storages to the south, and also there are, to the rear, a multifamily residential to the east of the site at the southwest corner of Verdugo Boulevard and Valley Highway. And the surrounding zones include both commercial to the north, I&D to the south, R2250, which is multifamily residential to the east, and commercial C31, commercial to the west, and of course the project site is commercial and industrial. There is a parking study that was prepared, and the latest iteration of the study is dated March 29th, 2018. The staff report outlines and points certain bullet points on the highlights of that parking study. It is before you. I can see you have it in your hands. Would you like me to go over what that parking study demonstrated verbatim based on what is outlined in the report, or the applicant is here and he's also, I could see, brought his traffic consultant is here in the audience, so he can refer to that. One additional item that I would like to make is regarding one of the conditions. As we move forward with this, and if you're inclined to approve it, I would highlight that one more condition be added, and that would be that a business registration certificate shall be applied and issued for a retail use that is allowed in the industrial I&D zone. There are certain specific land uses that are allowed in the I&D as it relates to retail. It's very limited, and so the future tenant would be subject to those only. They're outlined in the industrial zone chapter. And with that, staff does believe that all 4 or the findings for the parking reduction can be made in a positive manner, and therefore recommends approval of the entitlement. Staff again does suggest that the planning hearing officer consider the attached draft findings and conditions of approval. And with that, I will conclude my remarks, and if you have any questions, I am available.
Actually, just one question I was thinking of. What are some or all of the retail uses allowed in the I&D zone?
I need to go to refer to the code really quick.
That's fine.
Chapter 30.
While you do that,
Some of them, I could just highlight some of them. I believe there was a pharmacy is allowed. I recall there was also like a pool supply store is allowed.
okay.
Those are the ones right now I can
Off the
remember
top,
off the
okay.
top of my head. But as I continue to look through, I'll go back to that question. And one more thing I wanted to add, we did receive correspondence, and they're all in the file, and I also made copies and forwarded them to you for your review.
Okay, so let me just briefly go over our interdepartmental comments regarding the case. So from GWP Water and Power Engineering,
When you're ready, I have the information.
Okay, why don't you do that since I'm
Okay, so
rereading
alcoholic
stuff.
beverage sales with an AUP approval, building materials, supplies, sales, and services, hardware stores, jewelry stores, nurseries and garden supply stores, paint and wallpaper stores, pharmacy, spas and swimming pools, sales and service, and vehicle sales and leasing and rental agencies. And again, these are just outlined in the column. I didn't look at standards for these specific uses, but that would also apply as
Right,
well.
right. Okay. All right, so getting back to the interdepartmental comments, GWP has some standard conditions, but they also say the retail edition is in conflict with the existing underground electrical service conduit, cable, and metering equipment serving the retail units, which will require the project to relocate and install all new metering equipment for all retail uses. So that's a kind of a unique comment condition. Looks like everything else is pretty standard. Engineering. Engineering and traffic had the same comment. Their comment is on-street parking is in high demand in this project area. Any new development that does not meet parking requirements as per code may impact parking availability in the area. On and off-street parking availability may fluctuate as parking demand in this area may increase over time. So that's traffic and as part of the engineering department, public works department. Neighborhood services did not have any comments. Neither did maintenance services, integrated waste, no. So those are the comments from the other departments. We did get a number of letters, emails, etc. from looks like members of the public who live in the area, or I believe there was also a tenant in the center. I'm not going to read all of them, but they all expressed a lot of concern about the parking availability, the parking availability or lack thereof on the site as well as the surrounding area. So that was the common theme, and it looks like we got probably 8 or 9 comments from the neighborhood. So. All right, so let's move on to the applicant, Alan Malikian.
Good morning. My name is Alan Malikian. We're finally here. It's taken us about a year of delay and continuation. When we originally started, the application was filed right soon after we had a new tenant. So we decided that we would continue and get a new report. So at this moment, I just want to comment a little bit about the building design, but that's all, and then I will pass it along to our traffic. So our goal is to upgrade the building. Our goal is to make these shopping center, which we have proven by the management that bringing a proper tenants and revitalize the shopping center that has been pretty much vacant many years. I live very close by the shopping center, and by bringing or upgrading the project, the look, the facade, we're hoping that it would bring additional activities to the site. But the goal is to obviously address the parking, and that's why we have our traffic study done. And we can discuss a little bit about the parking and overflows and all that stuff, but I'll let traffic consultant to address that at this moment.
Okay.
Okay.
Jano Bagdanian.
Mr. Gizzo, thank you. Jana Bagdinian, JB Associates. We prepared the parking analysis for this shopping center. We've done multiple parking surveys. Any project of this size where you have an existing tenants and then you're adding a new retail component, there's always issues as to the parking, and there's no question about it that this has become a very successful shopping center. You have the Burger King there, which generates the parking demand. And then you also have a sushi store there that when we did parking surveys before the sushi store was restaurant was there, there was more parking available. Almost 50% of the parking spaces were available. You had a shopping center with that many parking spaces, but whether it was a viable shopping center, that's something that I'm sure the developer saw, and they brought in the sushi store in order to make it more popular and effective. As a result, the parking demand has gone up. So technically, we've done 6 days, almost 7 day surveys at the shopping center. We did it in the morning all the way to about 8:30 p.m. Our survey showed that early in the morning, parking demand wasn't there because most of the shops, the retail components open up at like 9 o'clock, and they all close around 7 p.m. The Burger King is almost 24 hours, and they're early in the morning. You have a little bit of a peak for breakfast type customers. 11:30 to 1:30 is their peak for lunch, and then between 5 to 6 o'clock is where the Burger King also has a lot of drive-through passenger customers that they come through. So when you really look at when is the worst time of the shopping center is at between almost 6 to 7:30 p.m. That's when the sushi store has the highest number of customers coming in, and that happens on Fridays and Saturdays. The rest of the week, if you go to that shopping center, there's always more than 40% of the parking spaces are available. Now, on Fridays and Saturdays, there's still parking spaces available, so when we looked at it, the 63 that is existing, it's striped, we subtract 8 parking spaces that is going to be lost as a result of building the 2,000 square feet. So we assumed our parking analysis as if there were 55 spaces. We looked at the parking occupancy out of the existing parking occupancy during the worst time of the day, which was on Fridays. And still, when you go look at it, there was about 3 to 4 parking spaces on site always available. Yes, it's busy when you drive by and you have to enter the parking lot. The prime locations are always taken, but there's parking spaces available in the back of the parking lot, as our surveys have shown. There's always parking available. You can argue that 4 parking spaces or 5 parking spaces is not adequate. There's also on-street parking spaces available. We did our survey. When we did our survey, we also looked at the on-street parking spaces on Verdugo Road. I know there's a comment from staff. It seems to me it's a more general comment about parking on Verdugo Boulevard. But if every time we looked at the on-street parking right between the 2 driveways on Verdugo Boulevard, those 5 parking spaces are maybe 1 or 2 spaces were parked, and that's only for a short-term period. So the combination of the on-site parking with the off-site parking, on-street parking, should be able to take care of these 8 space loss as a result of the addition of the 2,000 square feet. Most of these type of shopping center, anytime you add a retail space, there is going to be parking congestion. When I say parking congestion, there's parking available, but it's not readily right the first 5, 6 spaces that you want to have available. There are employees who park in there, and we've observed that parking, other people from adjacent businesses come and park there, which has shown that there are certain cars parked there all the time. We've informed the developer and the applicant that they should monitor the parking better, because that way they don't have people who don't belong to that shopping center park there. So that can be managed better. During the peak hours, I think that also can be managed better in terms of better signage in the parking lot. Improving the striping will make it easier, because some parking spaces, the striping is somewhat faded, so one car, we've observed many, many times, one or two cars will one car will take 2 parking spaces. It's a standard parking space, but takes 2 spaces. So that also shows that there is not enough parking in the parking lot. Overall, it's our opinion that with the addition of 2,000 square feet and obviously with the loss of 8 parking spaces, it will make it still a very viable parking shopping center, because there's a lot of also people going to the restaurant. They can also visit the retail spaces. So when you're calculating the parking requirement for each individual tenant in there, obviously the code requires more parking. But there's many times there's a lot of internal capture, where if you're going to the vitamin store, you may go to the Burger King. If you're going to the Burger King, you can go to the dry cleaners. So there's a lot of synergy among the tenants the way they are. They're type of retail that they can complement each other. So with that, Mr. Kizo, I think we believe it's going to be tight. I'm not here to say that the parking is 100% adequate, but it's a viable business that are there. In the sushi restaurant, really the problem is on Fridays, on Saturdays. And the time that it occurs is during the peak hours, between the dinner time peak hours from 6 to 7:30, which most of the retail store or whatever retail that goes in isn't really not going to be open. Also, I wanted to share with you that we also looked into the retail stores during our parking survey. So a vitamin store or a dry cleaner or the Goodwill store, there were only 1 or 2 people in there. So it's not like if they need 8 parking spaces, there were 8 people actually in those peak hours that are there. So the combination of all of those should provide, marginally, it's adequate. As a professional, I'll tell you that's marginally adequate, but it should work. Along Verdugo Boulevard, there's Montrose Shopping, but a lot of restaurants and businesses don't have off-street parking. They rely on the on-street parking and the off-street parking in the Montrose Shopping Park. Very, very similar. It's a combination of the two. They feed from each other and provide parking for the customers. And it's a very successful shopping center, as is evidenced by the demand on parking. Okay. With that, I can answer any questions you may have.
You know what? Let me take the next and probably the last speaker, and then I do have some questions for you.
Sure.
So. All right, John Draymond.
Good morning. Good morning. My name is John Draymond, and I'm an individual who lives in the affected area. I'm here as an individual, but I'm also here at the request of some of the property owners on Valley High Street and some of the businesses in the affected area that are adjacent to the site. It wasn't long ago that a parking reduction permit was granted for this same site, claiming that the lot was effectively underutilized. And here we are only 8 years later with the property owner asking for a second bite at the apple, another parking reduction permit, and this time not reducing available parking by just a handful of spaces, but by 16, more than double what was afforded the last time. Now, the initial parking study being used to justify this reduction in parking spaces was first conducted in February of 2017, when the largest retail space in this strip mall, other than the Burger King, was empty, vacant, as was stated. Now, although the parking study mentions a restaurant, that very first parking study, it fails to note that the restaurant was not yet open, nor does it mention that it's an all-you-can-eat restaurant, meaning that the folks who dine at this establishment are there for an extended period of time enjoying all that wonderful sushi. Now, the staff, being unaware that the traffic study had omitted that information, planning staff recommended approval of a parking reduction permit. But in fact, that restaurant opened in spring of 2017, after the staff had already recommended approval. Then an updated parking analysis was conducted in August and September of 2017, when the restaurant had been open only 3 months and had not yet had its official grand opening. But that information was left out of the most recent traffic and parking study. So here we are a year later, a year after that study was done, and what is being called an updated traffic report. Well, an updated traffic report. That was, it states on the paperwork that it was updated and submitted in March of this year, and Ms. Toledo mentioned it's an updated report as of March. Well, it's not. It's a report that the company that did the parking study stamped it March of this year. But when you read it, it's the exact same data they collected a year ago. So there's been no work done up there to look at this since August and September of 2017. That's a year ago, when, again, the second largest tenant, retail tenant in that complex, in that center, had only been open 3 months. They only had their doors open 3 months. They hadn't even had a grand opening yet. So the city's own traffic and engineering department, as you mentioned, has made it clear in their evaluation that the parking in this project area is in high demand, and that any development which does not meet the required parking code may well impact not just off-street parking, but also on-street parking. It makes that clear. And I don't know if I can have another moment just to finish up. Thank you. So what's wrong with this picture? I want to present the question that a lot of us are asking up there. When the economy is in a severe downturn, staff recommends that there's an approval of reduced customer parking. And that was 8 years ago. When business is booming to the extent that the owner is willing to invest in construction of 2,000 additional square feet of retail space, well, once again, staff is recommending the approval of reduced customer parking. And when the parking study conducted, when the parking study is sort of becomes obvious that it has to be redone because it was initially done with the second largest retail space vacant. Staff doesn't know that, and they recommend an approval of reduction of customer parking. And after it's redone a year ago, even though it was done when that same second largest space outside of the Burger King had only been open a couple of months, staff recommends a reduction, an allowance for a reduction in customer parking. And when the city's own Public Works Engineering Traffic Division warns that this park area is incredibly impacted, and it is, and it's being minimized here. That's nonsense about available parking all over Verdugo Boulevard. That does not exist. There are delivery trucks there all over Verdugo Boulevard. It is true that they're not there long periods of time, but you don't find parking up and down Verdugo Boulevard. That is an extremely impacted area. But even when the city's own department is saying we're highly impacted there, staff recommends an approval for a reduction in customer parking. So what the residents and businesses up there want to know, what exactly do you need to do to not get an approval for a reduction in customer parking? And lastly, I want to urge that this parking reduction permit be denied at this time anyway. I'm all for new business, and I go to this strip center all the time, and I try to make use of all those businesses there. But what is actually happening there is it has become the overflow lot for, it's not just retail across the street, it's a big box store across the street, it's Marshall's. There's an army of employees from Marshall's that park in this lot, and an army of employees from the 24-hour CVS pharmacy and the Vons grocery store that are across the street and just not even half a block up that are also sent over there. So some monitoring should be a condition there, not forever and not all day long, but at peak times. And the last thing I wanted to mention relates to the loading. There is no loading zone there. Those vehicles that are coming in, whether they're delivery vans, whether they're small box trucks, or whether the big wheelers that are coming in for the Goodwill store are utilizing the disabled parking there. That's what they use as their loading zone. Not only is that illegal, but on top of that, when you enter the parking lot off of Verdugo, I guess you would say the sort of the westmost entrance off of Verdugo, you can't get in. And when they do that, it also blocks 2 of the regular parking spaces at the same time. So I have a problem with increasing 2,000 square feet of retail and at the same time still not having a loading zone and utilizing a disabled, well, it's become a little more of an issue to me over the years. But the point is, using disabled parking spaces as a loading zone. I don't think that this project should go away. I just think that it should be, I think that there should be a current parking study done, not a year-old parking study. The updated version that was referred to is using the old data from a year ago. We should know what is going on now, currently. Thank you very much, and I appreciate the extra time.
Sure.
Thanks very much.
Rebuttal? Okay.
Mr. Kiesel, I
Yes.
do want to make a comment on something. Last time that there was the first parking study that was prepared, the shortfall was still the same. They were still proposing 2,000 square feet. The shortfall was still 16 spaces shortfall. The most recent parking study that you have, dated by the applicant, regardless of whether it was a last year count or it's dated what it is. And that's what we've noted in the staff report, the March 29th, 2018. So we'll go by that date.
I'm sorry, say the last sentence.
March, I believe,
Right.
29, 2018. So we'll go by that date because
Right.
that's what's dated on the document.
Right.
Is also for a 16-space shortfall for a 2,000 square foot tenant. So if there's any question as to why we're recommending approval on both instances, it's because the shortfall stayed the same, 16 spaces. At both instances, the first time the sushi restaurant was not accounted for because it wasn't there. So the applicant did revisit the study. Still, this time now marginally, like he stated, there is a somewhat of a parking issue, but still, I frequent the center too. I visited the area frequently, and I was able to note during my visits, as I was preparing the report, the first go around and the second go around, there were still some parking spaces available, like Mr. Bogdanian stated, marginally, but it was there. There were at least multiple times I counted between 2 to 4 parking spaces available during my site visits.
Ms. Giesel, thank you for the opportunity. I will try to address some of the comments made by Mr. Draymond. When we do a parking analysis or a traffic study, we collect data at the time where the applicant requests us to do so. Yes, when we collected the first round, the sushi restaurant was in the process of being built, so frankly, we were not aware of this not currently in the operation. So we did the survey, and we indicated at the time, yes, there was more parking spaces. As I said, more than 40% of the parking spaces are available. Subsequent to that, it came to the hearing. There was issues raised, not only about the survey, but in general about the parking, about the need for a retail space in that location. We went back in August and September 2017. We did additional surveys, which are in the documentation, and all the raw data is also available. What happens is most of the time when a new restaurant, especially new restaurants come in, the type of traffic they generate is much higher than once they settle down and the parking generation, number of customers. If it's a successful restaurant, obviously it peaks in the beginning and it reduces. And I say that because we do similar surveys with all these types of projects where you have an initial peak, you go to the restaurant the first time, you like it, you don't like it, you don't go back. If you like it, you stay. So the sushi restaurant initially had a in September, higher parking demand. As of last Friday and Saturday, because we want to make sure we're providing you with the correct data, we went back, personally I went back on Saturday, I went on Friday. Again, the same time of the day, which is about 6 to 7:30, on Friday is the busiest time when that sushi restaurant creates the most of the parking demand. And we verified that. It's very similar. It was less parking available than we did when obviously there was no restaurant there, but it was very consistent with the beginning of when we did the survey in August. So we've done 2-hour surveys. We have not provided the data, but I do have the data if staff is requesting. I can provide that. We've done 2-hour surveys, especially on the peak days. We even did it on a Monday, on a Thursday when they have all you can eat, but that's from 12 to 5 p.m. If you can go there, you can see that. that doesn't generate it. So we always look at the worst case scenario, and in this case, the worst case scenario is on that day, there is parking. I do have a difference of opinion about staff's comments from Public Works. I don't think they've done a survey in that block. Yes, you could have parking demand higher near mostly Verdugo Boulevard at Montrose, but at Honolulu, the parking demand there is different. But if you really look at the curb face all the way to the 2 freeway on southbound on-ramp, there's rarely cars parked there. Not that they don't park there, people do park there, but during the survey times, maximum we had 1, maybe 2 cars parked on street. So as far as parking demand in that block on street, it is not as bad as it's indicated in the Public Works staff. And I will check with them to see what data they have to prove that information. Yes, as Mustard Dryman also mentioned, there's employees from other businesses, they come and park there. Because I know Marshall's probably monitors their parking, so they push employees, and employees try to find a space where they can park it. Better monitoring on behalf of the developer definitely will improve the availability of parking only for the customers of the shopping center. Those are my comments.
Okay. So, before you come up, Mr. Malikian, so what you're contending is, okay, these numbers are basically a year old in the parking study, but you were out last weekend, and the numbers that you found last weekend were pretty consistent with what you show in the parking study that was done about a year ago.
That's correct, Mr. Friesel. And I wanted to say that since this hearing has been rescheduled every time, and as a good professional, we always go and check our data just to see as things have changed. We've done, again, a Friday, Saturday study before every one of these hearings that got postponed. So we have that data as well. In other words, it's very consistent. If I generate that data and provide it to you, it will be the same opinion that I will express here, that Fridays, Saturdays are the worst times, and we're still technically by code is 16 parking spaces short, and it's marginally acceptable to have a shopping center as long as the other retail store is somewhat consistent, so that there's that internal capture of the uses for the customers that visit that shopping center.
Do you have that data here now?
I don't have it with me. I was actually going through my notes, but I do have it available. I can email it or send it to you.
Okay,
Or
go through.
Sure.
Thank you. I just want to add a really quick comment. And this is a 30-year-old shopping center. It was a dilapidated, lot of variances and different approvals were granted many years ago in the 1990s, and there's another one, the 2010. Most of the businesses that were there for those variances are gone, didn't survive. We have a new developer, new person that took over, wants to revitalize the shopping center. I mean, the key for having a shopping center is an active shopping center. You
Right.
don't want to have a dead shopping center. That's the nature of a shopping center. So by arguing that, you know, we have a busy shopping center, that we have an active users, and we just don't want to have the same activities that you would have a successful shopping center, it's just preposterous. I can't even comprehend that logic. So our goal is to make the shopping center new, current, look right, feel right, and be able to address as much as we can for the parking issues, which should not be a concern, because we're going to be doing whatever we can to make everything work properly and feel properly, and the success of the shopping center.
Okay.
Okay? Thank you.
What is the retail use that's going in?
Right now, we don't have a choice, but obviously the list of the choices, I mean, there's a pharmacy, I think that would be one of the better choices. The other one would be a jeweler, or any of those retailers that we have the list of.
Okay.
Obviously, we're not going to go through a variance or anything on this specific.
So you don't have a retail tenant in mind?
Not at this moment, no.
Okay, all right.
And one quick comment on the water and power. We are aware, but once we go through the construction document, we'll deal with
Yeah.
that with an electrical engineer.
Yeah, okay. I may jump around a little bit.
Sure.
In the traffic study, in the parking study, there's language in there that's I think it's an assumption that, and I'll just read my notes, and maybe Mr. Bagdanian will remember that. How do you conclude the retail use will only use 50% of the parking spaces during the peak 3 hours? Let me see if I can. Do you, okay. There were some assumptions
Yes.
here that. Why did you assume 50%? Why not 75% or 10% or?
Typically, most of these types of retails that are in a small shopping center, based on parking surveys we've done, other than fast food locations where truly most of the parking is used, except if they have a drive-through, for example, like Burger King, there is, we count on actually how many cars go into the drive-through. There's just more cars going through the drive-through than there are actually people who are parking for there. So retail stores such as vitamin stores, for example, jewelry stores, you don't use exactly the same number of parking spaces per code. A lot of people, if you go into the vitamin stores, as I said, we looked at the vitamin store, at the dry cleaners, at the Goodwill store. Most of them, maximum, there were 1 or 2 customers, they were in there during the survey hours. So that's where we've assumed that all 8 code parking requirement for a typical store does not get used unless it's like a fast food restaurant where they already have that. So that was the logic behind using half the spaces. So if, assuming in the worst case scenario, there's 6 or 7 parking spaces available during the peak of the restaurant uses, we assume that at that time, at 6 o'clock, any type of retail that goes in is not going to have 8 people using that retail store inside that's going to need parking. Assume that half of those, even if half of the people were using it, there's still adequate parking in this. It will almost be full. Definitely, it'll almost be full. That's why I used marginally, meets their code, meets the parking demand requirement. But that's the logic behind using half the parking spaces.
Okay.
It's more of also an internal capture, shared parking kind of a analogy that's used in the Urban Land Institute document.
Okay, so it's not just how you do things, it's kind of recognized within your profession?
Yes.
In terms of with the Urban Land Institute?
Yeah, Urban Land Institute does a huge analysis about shared parking where you have some types of retail restaurant combinations that work together. There's a lot of synergy among the type of customers who go there. So if you're going to the dry cleaner, there's a potential you can go to the Burger King, or if you go to Burger King, you also go to the dry cleaner. So those type of things, shared parking helps reduce the parking, and it's an acceptable methodology when you look at parking demand analysis for shopping centers.
Okay, all right. If this thing were approved, how would you feel about restricting the hours of operation of the retail tenant?
As far as that is a question I would pose to the applicant if you want to answer that. But typically retails will be, the ones that are there, they open from 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. I think the dry cleaner opens up a little earlier,
Right.
which is not a problem. But typically most of the retail stores there are between 9 and 7, so maybe beyond that hour will be acceptable.
Yeah, and I think as far as the limiting the hours of operation, there's already existing. So I don't know, limiting one specific, the new tenant, it's just gonna, I mean, we can discuss it with the developer and see if he's fine with it, but it's just gonna be difficult for us to control that. That's one of the things. And the other thing that I just wanna add to the parking, just a observation, I guess you want to call it. Let's say for the Burger King, we have 3,000 and so based on the parking count, we need to provide certain number of parking for that. But most of the parking is a kitchen and a storage area. But the same parking count goes for those spaces too, but no one usually uses. So either way, you know, there's some numbers there that there's a cushion number there. So majority of these spaces are, like Ronald said, you know, the you know, Vitamin Shop and other places that I go to, it's like maximum 10 minutes, 15 minutes. You go and you buy your vitamins and sit in the car and leave. So it's not something that as you would have. So, but yeah,
Okay.
and the hours of operation, I mean, if it's, you know, 9 to 5 or 9 to 6 or 7, you know, I mean, I don't know if it's going to control the parking as much for that, but I mean, we can definitely discuss that with the client.
Okay.
Okay.
In the parking study, you state that that is less than likely that the proposed retail will use all 8 parking spaces during the peak period, which is 6:30 to 8:30, which is partly what I just asked you about, as most of the retail uses in the shopping center operate from 9 to 6. Is that, and that was in the parking study.
Right.
So why is the peak demand for parking 6:30 to 8:30? I can just assume from this is that the Burger King and the sushi restaurant
That's pretty much how it.
fill up that parking lot, or
Yes, Mr. Kiesel, if you look at if you go there when we're doing the survey every half hour, you see that there's a lot of customers who go to the sushi restaurant. That's when it begins, around 5:45 to 6 o'clock. If you look at the charts, you'll see that's where the number of occupied parking spaces goes up. Almost we count like 49. I think the highest was 49 at 1 hour. So we looked at the whole day. We averaged the whole day. We picked the highest 3 hours so that then we went down further to the highest 1 hour. And that 1 hour is when there were 49 parking spaces. So imagine if you took away 8 spaces out of the 63, you're only left with 55 parking spaces. There were like 6 spaces available in that one peak 1 hour. But before that 1 hour or after that peak hour, there were still more spaces available. So the Burger King, and in the table, we also did a survey of the Burger King on page 13 of the parking study. We show that on the average you have like almost 20, like 10:30 in the morning, you have 28 cars go to the drive-thru. They don't park there. So Burger King technically should have 36 spaces based on code requirements.
Okay.
But most of the Burger King customers go drive-through. And less of them are parking actually, and they only use those spaces that are on but basically on the south side and the west side of the Burger King restaurant. There's like 8 spaces. Most of those are used with a walk-in. They walk in, they get a burger, and they walk out. Most of the people go through. So Burger King actually helps the shopping center because of the drive-through. Otherwise, if they didn't have a drive-through, you will definitely have no available parking in the shopping center with the combination.
well, you may also have less patrons at Burger King.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, because of the convenience, it's near the freeway.
Yeah.
You know, people just drive through, get a burger, and then drive out, get back onto the freeway, and we observed that as well.
Okay. Why aren't parking surveys conducted Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday? Is that just
We actually looked at, when we did our survey, we did a preliminary survey on those days during those peak hours. We found that Monday, Tuesday, Wednesdays were not as busy, so we concentrated our efforts on doing multiple Fridays and Saturdays and Sundays because, you know, you may get a Friday, Saturday, Sunday where actually the demand for parking is low. So we did 2 weekends in a row, basically, so that we can capture a basically average of maybe one day, one weekend was higher, one weekend was lower. We can capture the highest or worst case scenario. That's why we need to. But Monday, Tuesday, in fact, last Monday, this Monday of this week, when we looked at it before the hearing, we checked it during their happy hour for the sushi restaurant, and that ends at 5 o'clock. But right at 5 o'clock, there were 22 parking spaces available. Right then at 5 o'clock. So, and then it died down until 7 o'clock, and there was almost 50% of the spaces that were available.
Okay. What? Oh, yeah, I do. That's okay. That's all right.
You were finished.
No.
Sorry.
So the exact current uses on the site is the sushi restaurant, the Burger King, there's a vitamin store,
Yeah. It's a hair salon, dry cleaner, and Goodwill. Good.
Okay. Do you know how that Goodwill works? Because, and I know this isn't directly related to what we're talking about now, but it says on the Google map it's a bookstore and donation center. And I know the Goodwill store that is closest to my house is a donation center as well. And they basically park a semi out there all day, and people drop off their stuff throughout the day from, I think it's from 9 to 7. And the workers, go through the piles of stuff and then I'm assuming load it into the semi. Is that how this Goodwill works?
We note any particular incidents during the survey. In our survey days, we did not see any. They were smaller. Most of them are pickups or vans that we observed, where people are coming in and they drop off boxes full of books. And most of that, it takes like 5-10 minutes. I would agree that the handicap parking ADA spaces are violated, depending on, if people are just pull in and do a quick drop off and they leave, which is very typical, unfortunately, in many shopping centers. But most of the time we didn't see anything large parked there on an ongoing basis. Most of it was pickups where people come in and they drop off a box of books.
Is it just a bookstore? Is it a full range of?
What I've observed, honestly, I didn't go inside, but it's mostly that we saw boxes or people with little bags of books that would be bringing it into the store and they just leave it. Or the people will go in and get some books. That's the extent of it. But it wasn't, because it's not a major one, I think.
It is a very small store. It's just mainly for drop-off. It's not a huge store. It's a fairly small store.
Okay.
Not maybe under 2,000, 1,300.
Okay, but is it just a Goodwill that
Pretty much drop
has
off.
books? If I went
They
in,
do have, it seemed like it's just more of a donation. They just drop off, but they do have some books. I guess they have some.
It's a combination.
so okay, can I go in and shop at this Goodwill? Okay.
It's a donation center from what we saw, and I said it's a combination of what we saw, where mostly people would drop off boxes.
Okay.
Or maybe racks of clothes or things like that. That's
Okay,
how
so
it's
it doesn't operate exactly how I'm thinking of
Yeah.
in the Goodwill store near me, where there's a constant stream of people dropping off and donating, but there's also a retail store there that I can go in and buy stuff.
Yeah,
Okay.
I know. There's one in my neighborhood where it's a little larger, almost 2,500 square feet. It's actually, you can donate, but there's like It's like a Barnes and Noble. There's like books all over. You can walk in and stay there and, you know, buy books and things like that. So,
But this
This is
one, I
not-
can't even do that.
no.
I can't shop for
Yeah.
books.
So about,
You need to come up if you're going to talk.
it's very limited from what I know. Again, as I said, in all honesty, I didn't walk in.
Seems
there
like
to-
it's very limited.
Okay.
I don't think you can consider it as a retail place. It's more of a donation. If somebody wants to
Okay.
go and, I guess, buy something, they can probably, but it's mostly donation.
Okay.
Yeah, that's what, you know, I haven't walked in there, so it's all, pretty much all the information that I'm.
It's about 1,500 square feet.
Okay, so I could go in my Honda Accord or minivan, park in a space, drop off the books that I need to drop off, and someone would help me. How does the stuff that I donate, that you donate, then get transported to the other Goodwills in the area that then sell the books and other stuff? Do they use minivans or do they use bigger stuff, bigger semis?
Mr. Kizan, I can't answer that question.
Okay.
As far as what type of vehicle and when, how often they use it. As I said, the only thing we visited as part of the survey, we saw people who are dropping off whatever goods they had at the Goodwill store, and we didn't see anything major as far as trucks or anything that would have, you know, blocked the driveways or blocked the parking space.
Did you see any standard size vans that said Goodwill?
No.
Okay,
I
so-
can check with my surveyor that did the surveys, but nothing was noted in my survey data to show that it was something out of the ordinary that we were concerned about as part of doing the survey.
Okay, okay. How open would you all be to restricting the hours of loading, unloading, and to the types of vehicles that could do that?
We can certainly discuss it with the applicant if you give us a chance. However, I guess depends on what are the limitations and for which one of the uses.
Right.
Because typically, if you have a restaurant or a Burger King, they have delivery trucks. And my experience with most of the fast food restaurant types is very difficult to control their delivery of sodas, because depending on how many deliveries they have to do throughout the day, they may come in at 8 o'clock in the morning, they may come in at 10 o'clock in the morning, they may come in the afternoon.
Okay.
So there's certain types of services, deliveries, that no restaurant can control because they place the order, and depending on where they fall into the order of the deliveries, you know, if you told a soda truck, Coke truck that you have to be there at 7 a.m. in the morning, it will be we won't be practical.
Okay.
Based my experience dealing with this type of studies.
Okay,
But a retail
so
component might be something that can be discussed as far as what type of hours of operation it may have.
so you'd be hesitant to agree to restrictions on the hours of loading and unloading at that center.
I think, as I said, depending on which one of the tenants you're imposing it. I tell you, for a Burger King,
Right.
it will be difficult. However, there is a possibility, like in many typical restaurants, like you have them on Brand Boulevard, on busiest, you know, in Honolulu in the shopping mall, that either if there's an alley, they deliver in the alley, or you can designate a loading zone on Verdugo Boulevard, because most of these deliveries takes 5 minutes. They just unload, they have a dolly, and they take it inside and then bring it out. So those can be accommodated. We can work with Public Works to designate on-street loading so large trucks do not enter the shopping center. That's very typical. It can be done. That's something, if you want to consider that might be more of a practical option.
Okay. All right. I mean, getting back to the parking study, is it accurate to say that in your tables, where the number of empty spaces is 16 or less, that's where you anticipate the real parking pinch points?
Yes.
Okay. So,
That's where our data shows that, we get, if you look at table 15 on page 10,
okay.
if you see on Thursday, there were 26 empty spaces. And then
Right.
on Friday, we combined 2 Fridays and 2 Saturdays.
Okay.
We reached at 40 or 43 that there's only 20 spaces. So we're a little above the 16 space problem. Then if you look at the hourly, we picked on table 9, on page 9.
Mm-hmm.
If you look at table 12, at the bottom where it shows the
Right.
highest parking demand, and there's 49 at 6:30. So
Right.
if you just look at one strict hour of saying this is when the worst condition occurs, and it is consistent. As I said, I verified it again on last Friday when is the busiest time of the shopping center. That's worse than it gets. So if you have 55 parking spaces after you remove the 8, you're down to 6. And that was fairly consistent with. So you got 6 spaces in 1 hour. That's going to be the worst case. And if you agree with the assumption that if a new retail gets added and you only have, 3 or 4 people in the retail store at that point, you could get close to parking, being full. You also have the on-street parking available at that point, where people, if the parking lot is full, they park on street within that block. And I'm not going farther because people are not going to walk that far to the adjacent residential street or go closer to the 2 freeway in order to go to the restaurant. If it's sometimes there's no parking, people do that. They walk more than a block. But in this case, I think the combination of the on-street and the worst-case scenario, that 1 hour happens. But before that 1 hour, at 6:30, when this happened, there were more parking spaces in the shopping at 5:30. There are more parking spaces available at 7:30. So it's just a 1 hour. We wanted to portray that we agree. It's a successful shopping center and it's busy. Is that good or bad? So that's
Right.
the question to address.
Yeah, but at that point, because you're not just taking away spaces that are existing now, you're adding tenant space that hopefully is going to generate customers and increase the parking demand. So
You're doing it both ways.
Right,
I
right.
don't we do agree with that. I mean, we technically have to add 8 more parking spaces.
Right. That's why I say 16.
That I don't disagree with it. If you go strictly by that numerical number of 16,
Right.
you don't have enough parking.
Right.
But from a practical standpoint, based on the data we've collected, that data is still valid even if we did it again, okay? You'll probably have that same result with the premise that there is shared parking that will occur, and with the premise that not all 8 parking spaces for the new retail will be used during that peak 1 hour or 2 hours on a Friday.
Right. I mean, the 16 spaces is what's required and what we're saying you need to provide. What you're saying is with the taken away parking and the added amount of retail tenant space, you really are not going to need the 16 spaces. That's your...
Yeah.
Okay.
So, another factor these days, I'm sure everybody would agree, is that new forms of transportation, which called transportation network companies, Uber and Lyft, If you just go in front of the sushi restaurant and you see how many people take a Uber and Lyft to and from the restaurant, you'll be amazed. Any restaurant, any bar these days. So if you have the parking, people would like to go to a restaurant. They want to enjoy themselves. We have one or two drinks. They don't want to drive. So that parking now, with more and more people using these services, the demand for parking is reduced, and over time it's even going to get less and less. So that's another factor in addition to the shared parking opportunities that exist, that really, if you want to have a successful businesses, then the combination of these things should be considered by the city to say, yes, is it possible to allow a 2,000 square feet to be added or not?
Mm-hmm. Okay. Let's see. In the parking study, you just make the assumption that the deliveries at the new to retail space will operate similar to the other retail spaces. Is there any you know, if you don't know the retail space that's moving in, how do you assume that?
Again, I don't know what type of a retail store, but basically from what the applicant has mentioned, inconsistent with like a pharmacy or those type of retails do not require large truck deliveries as you would for a food type business. So incidentally, we've seen like a small vans for that do deliveries as part of the survey for the dry cleaner. So sometimes they bring in clothes and they take them away to an outside facility for that purpose. So most of them you're talking about minivans for these types of stores where they do deliveries that are not large semi-trucks or trucks.
Okay. So limiting the hours of operation or the hours of loading, unloading may be feasible for the retail tenants, but not as much for the restaurant tenants.
You can, again, from my experience, even if you put such a requirement for any type of business, it's very hard to enforce and control.
Right, but I would expect that the
But the-
property owner would do that.
Yes, that's true. That's true.
Okay.
I think there are limitations, as I said, for food services because depending on what kind of a delivery and what company delivers.
Sure.
Sometimes you have multiple deliveries and one company changes, they are delivering food from a different source, and then it's very difficult to contact them and says you can only deliver at 8 a.m. in the morning or 7 a.m. in the morning. That makes it impractical. Not that they cannot be enforced by the property owner if it's on a continuous basis, but there is a possibility to do that to the extent that they can.
Okay. And then in your presentation, you spoke about parking management and the belief that there are a number of parking spaces taken up in this center from employees mostly, or customers maybe, from, I guess, the big box center across the street, the Marshalls.
There's a Marshalls across the street.
Yeah,
That has its own parking on site.
yeah.
As a matter of, in fact, if can you Google,
Can we look at that?
they actually have parking that wraps around that side street as well, because there's a side entrance that I personally use, as opposed to going through Verdugo Boulevard. So I can't point to it, but yeah. But I'm gonna drop the little guy there. And
Okay,
then
so-
that's Park Place as well. So we can see that they have parking on.
So
in the
that's the
back.
Marshalls right there.
This is the Marshalls.
Okay.
And I mean, frequent this place very often, and I've never had issues finding parking and having to go park off-site. There's also the CVS Center, which has the nail place.
And is that going more toward
That's
the
a little
freeway?
east more, and I'll get there now. That one has a CVS. It has Vaughn's. It has
Okay.
Tortas. It's a fast food, Korean barbecue, and it also has just other Lavina's nail spa. Also another center that I frequent often, and it has Wingstop's on the other side. There's a vitamin store, and I believe now there's Sprint, like a mobile wireless store, is also there.
And then it becomes La Cañada, right?
Right. Well, I don't know the exact boundary at this.
Yeah, I think I'm remembering actually
But I
part of this
believe-
center
Right.
might be in La Cañada.
There's the urgent care just north of that.
Okay. And so, sorry, go on.
Oh, no, go ahead. I was just going to say, yeah, I believe on this north side portions is La Cañada. That's where the movie theater and that center is. And then portions of the south side where the Keck Verdugo Hills hospital is, portion of it is in actually Glendale. So depending on where on the map, you'd have to look at it to see where the boundaries are.
Yeah.
But again, going back to the area in question that we were looking at, the CVS and then the Marshalls, that's all within the Glendale jurisdiction.
Okay.
And I frequent these areas myself, and I've
Can you
always
go-
found parking on site at these centers.
The opposite. Well, wait. Maybe that's the opposite way. Can you go back on Verdugo more toward the subject site? Thank you. And is that the site? It's hard to see with the,
Yeah, that's the site.
okay, the glare. Okay. And then can you orient it more toward going, yeah.
Keep going.
No, that's fine.
Okay.
That's fine. Okay, so apparently there's some evidence that the marshals and the CVS workers are not parking in their what appears to be pretty generous parking lots, and they're parking on the subject site.
I can't verify that they were vehicles. We did notice during our survey, there were, we did it almost 8 days, different times of the week, and we noticed that there were vehicles that are parked there all the time. Now, whether they were, because I can't check who the owner of the vehicles is, there were at least 4 or 5 vehicles on a typical survey day that you would see it, whether it was in the morning or it was in the afternoon. Did they come from the Marshalls or any of those other locations? I can't tell you. But with more of a management of that parking on a typical day basis, making sure that typically sometimes shopping center, they ask whoever is the owner or people who work there, give us their license plate number of the vehicle so we know that these are vehicles that are employee vehicles. So you can check that at least. And if any cars are parked there on a longer period, put a notice on the vehicle saying, hey, you're parking here on a regular basis. So those types of overall management can be done to improve making sure the customer parking, employee parking is for the shopping center, not from the outside.
What other parking management tools can you suggest that would be effective and that the property owner or the management company could easily implement to address what appears to be parking
One thing is, based on this new layout, the parking is going to be restriped. That's going to improve the parking because, as I said, some of the spaces that are faded, so larger vehicles take advantage and they park into two spaces, and that's always a problem. That's one. There's also, again, we can recommend to the applicant that work with smaller type shopping centers. You see that they designate at least 1 or 2 spaces for the dry cleaner because it's a quick in and out pickup. So the customer is not inconvenienced, or at least restaurant employees or restaurant patrons don't park in front of the dry cleaner. Most of the time they do that. Or you can have we can recommend where it might be easier for the smaller size trucks or pickup vans that we can designate for. We tell the businesses, look, here's where your pickup truck or a van can do your pickups and deliveries, and recommend a certain hours that you should try to not come in at Friday afternoon when the busiest time of the shopping center for deliveries. I don't think it happens, but at least you can discourage that. Some of those types of conditions that can be worked with the tenants to help them with their parking, also to help for the betterment of the parking operation. Those are type of recommendations I will have.
Okay. Is there on-site security personnel?
Not to my knowledge, no.
How feasible is that?
I have to defer that to, okay. Excuse me, may I ask?
Sure.
I'll be right back. The applicant says they can certainly look into it, and maybe in this initial period when the retail store, should it be approved, that they will do more detailed monitoring, especially during those peak hours, to ensure that the parking operation works smoothly, and make sure that people are not parking in the shopping center. They don't belong there. They're not customers, or they're employees from outside. So they can do that monitoring on a regular basis, but not for a long-term period, as long as things settle down and they make sure that everybody is aware that, this new parking lot is going to operate in a different way than they used to, where people were coming in and parking there for a long time.
Why not long-term?
Obviously, with any type of additional security type operations, there's a cost involved. Certainly that is a potential hardship if you, not that it's not feasible, but it's always a financial factor when it's on a long-term basis. Or maybe it could be on a limited basis. At least you monitor it, not the whole day, like you have a parking attendant sitting there and monitoring, because truly that's not going to be helpful. That parking lot doesn't need full operation all the time, but maybe on a peak hour basis, maybe only on weekends. Those are types where you have a restaurant where there's a parking lot on Fridays or Saturdays. They have somebody monitor it, but not necessarily for the whole week.
And currently, employees who work on site can park wherever they want.
Yes, but there are employees we've seen that they bike to this center. They use bicycles. They go there. Employees, they use public transit. But there is also employees, mostly the owners of these individual businesses that are, it's very obvious that they would have to park there.
And they park wherever?
Most of them park, they don't park in front of their store. If you see the second half of the parking lot, that's where they park. Obviously, they know they want to make the prime locations available for their customers.
How effective is requiring the employees to park in the less desirable parking spaces on site? How effective is that?
It is effective. I mean, in other words, where the trash bin is,
Which is right?
yeah.
Isn't it here?
Yes. And you have one space, I think, is on the one side of the trash bin next to the wall. There's two other spaces. Ideally, a customer doesn't want to go in the back of a parking lot and park there. So certainly, I'm sure the developer applicant can work with the tenant, say, listen, it's best for the shopping center where if you're going to park your vehicle, park next to the trash bin, and that's where you park. Burger King employees, you should park over here. Not that it's signed, but you want them to park there. That way we make all the prime locations available for customers.
Right,
That
I
would
don't know that
definitely-
I'd want it signed, but I would, that's, potentially one thing that the center can do to, utilize the less desirable parking as much as possible to free up the more desirable parking as much as possible.
That is something shopping centers do. I'm sure like the Marshalls and the Vaughnses, they tell their employees, we can't see you parking right in front of the shopping center. You got to be way in the back, or it's a holiday or something. They make sure that they carpool or use public transit or something like that. So,
All right.
yeah, I'm sure it's something practical that can be worked with the tenants.
So that might be something realistically that we could implement if this thing were approved.
Yes? Yeah.
Okay. I may have gotten through all my questions. Give me a second. Let me look. Oh, Ms. Toledo mentioned the additional condition that wasn't included in the staff report about, basically it just clarifies that this is in an IND zone. And so the retail uses allowed in that zone are, much more constrained than in a standard commercial zone. You all are clear about that?
Yes.
Okay. Have you spoken to anybody in Public Works regarding the feasibility of designating a loading zone on Verdugo?
I have not. I did, since this issue has come up, I have not. I did try to, before this meeting and yesterday, to have a talk with Public Works Traffic Engineer. I was not able to talk to them, but I will certainly follow through because I think that's an option that can be
Okay.
implemented, subject to their approval.
Okay. I've gone through all my questions, so
Thank you very much.
sure. Do you have anything else to say? Okay. Okay. So I'm going to use the gavel and conclude the public hearing. And we have no more cases today, so that'll conclude our meeting as well. I am going to, actually, I should not conclude it quite yet. I'm going to take this case under submission and issue a decision at some point. So now I will conclude the meeting. Thanks.
anything survive when these little minds tear you in two? What a town without pity can do. No, it isn't very pretty what a town without pity can do.
Really not a good idea. Plus, gross. Okay, but really, while driving? Hey man, to each his own. But again, while driving? Nope, not while driving. You definitely wouldn't do this while driving. Oh sure, that's safe. Are you kidding me? Pay attention and just drive.
In a minute, I'm going to drown in this pool, surrounded by friends and relatives. That's because Dad thinks Mom is watching me, and Mom thinks Dad is. But actually, nobody is watching me. And you rarely make a sound when you're struggling.
Don't assume someone else is watching. Become a water watchdog at abbyshope.org.
If temperatures are high and we ask you to save energy now, turn off all unnecessary lighting, set your thermostat to 78 degrees or higher, and try not to use major appliances between 1 p.m. and 8 p.m. This helps us all save energy and prevent power outages during heat waves. Saving energy now equals keeping the lights on for everyone. Think, act, save. We all have the power.